everyone. Many thanks for joining this first webinar in the series on Source2C. My name is Gareth James Lloyd and I work at the UNEP-DHI partnership, and we are a United Nations Environment Programme Collaboration Centre, and our focus is on freshwater and environmental issues. It's my job today to be the facilitator of this webinar, and with me also from UNEP-DHI is Maija Bertule, providing technical support. The purpose of this webinar series is to highlight the importance of understanding the cross-disciplinary connections needed to achieve SDG 6 on freshwater and SDG 14 on oceans. In more direct terms, what we want to share and discuss with you here is the value of integrating efforts to reduce the negative effects and maximize potential benefits. And what we've done through the series is to gather together a number of expert presenters who will be using their experiences and sharing their selected case studies with you, and these will be used to exemplify the application of approaches designed to address specific issues. This Source2C management webinar series is developed in collaboration with a number of partners. These include UN Environment, SIWI, the UNDP Water Governance Facility, and the Action Platform for Source2C Management. The platform itself includes a whole host of organizations. I haven't included all the logos here, there's far too many, but we'll be introducing the platform in a little bit more detail shortly in the first presentation. I think I will now go on to the presentations. Just to introduce those, 1 second. Yeah, today we're very pleased to have 3 experts who are going to be sharing their knowledge and experiences with us. We're going to begin by what can probably be considered as a keynote presentation for the series from Birgitta Liss of SIWI. Birgitta, I hope that isn't putting too much pressure on you, but Birgitta will be helping us set the scene by presenting the needs for Source2C management and the important linkages to the SDGs. Following on from Birgitta, we'll be drilling down into a little bit more detail to look at 2 specific areas where Source2C issues are particularly evident and easy to appreciate. These are going to be deltas and small island developing states, also known as SIDS. And to help us with this, I'm pleased to say we have Professor Dan Tarlock of Illinois Tech Chicago-Kent College of Law. And Dan also represents the Global Water Partnership. He will be presenting to us on river deltas and telling us why these are particularly stressed and what can be done about it. And while Dan's starting point is going to be the United States, as he will explain, the scenarios that he's going to be sharing with us will be applicable everywhere. Rounding off today's presentations will be Professor Jacob Opadeyi, sorry about that, Jacob, nearly got it wrong, of the University of West Indies in Trinidad. And Jacob will be giving us an overview of the Source2C issues affecting small island developing states. And he'll be using the Caribbean as an example. And SIDS are, of course, particularly interesting from a Source2C perspective, as one can often find many, if not all, of the types of Source2C challenges in quite a concentrated geography. Each presentation is going to take approximately 10 to 15 minutes. The plan is to allow for 1 to 2 questions immediately after presentation, just to pick up on anything immediate and also to break things up a little bit. We'll also be allowing some space at the end for additional questions. So if you, the participants, could look at your screen, you'll notice there's a grey box on the right-hand side. If you can't see the box, you may need to click the arrow to bring it out. And in the list of options there, you'll see one for questions. You're welcome to make good use of that by typing and sending your questions to us. A small request from my side, it would be a big help if you could identify for us the person you are directing the question to, or if it's general, you can just write all. And it would also be great if you could keep your question as brief and to the point as possible, and that's just so we'll be able to ensure a greater number of good and direct responses. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Maija to pass the control of the presentation over to Birgitta so she can begin. Birgitta, please unmute your microphone whenever you're ready, and I'll let you know when we can hear and see your screen.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm unmuted. Can you see my screen?
I can hear your voice, and now I can see your screen. For others, it may take a second or two depending on your internet connection, but it will come. Yes, Birgitta, we can see it all. You're ready to go. Please proceed.
Thank you. So my name is Birgitta Liss Lymer. I'm the coordinator of the Source2See platform Secretariat, which is hosted by SIWI. And I would like to thank all the participants that have joined the webinar. In my presentation, I will try to frame the Source2See priorities. So to say, what do we mean by Source2See? Why is it important? What are the gaps, and how are Source2See linkages covered by the main global development policy framework that we have today, the Sustainable Development Goals? First, I would like to mention why we're doing this work. And this slide represents the quick version of the Source2See problem formulation, so to speak. We have a situation globally and in many local places as well, with severe deterioration of the environmental conditions in rivers, aquifers, wetlands, deltas, coasts, and marine areas. In most of the world, our water systems are subject to high pressures, and many of these pressures come from activities that take place upstream, in areas that do not experience all of the negative impacts of the activities that are undertaken. At the same time, it is so challenging to effectively manage the important connections between the pressures posed upstream and the impacts experienced downstream. And the trend for the future is pointing towards an increasing competition of resources and the need for even more critical trade-offs when it comes to resource distribution, land, water, energy, food resources. We need to do better, and we need more knowledge and more experience on how to manage resources sustainably, all the way from the source to the sea. At the same time, the water world, or how to call it, is more or less completely divided into fresh and salty, where the salty part is very aware of the impacts of upstream activities but has little influence over them. And upstream, the coast and the sea can feel very far away sometimes, while there is perhaps more focus on issues related to production and water allocation. So last year, the UN General Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as an integrated and indivisible agenda to balance social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. It's a very ambitious agenda, as we all know, and now all countries have to implement it. In this agenda, the fresh and the salty division can be seen also here. We have SDG 6, which focuses on clean water and sanitation, and we have SDG 14, for example, that concerns the sustainable use and protection of marine resources. And then one important aspect of the SDGs concerns, of course, the aim to somehow balance or even decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. To do that, we will need to understand system linkages and improve our capacity in addressing them. For example, target 14.1 to reduce marine pollution is obviously dependent upon sustainable agriculture, wastewater treatment, sustainable cities, sustainable consumption and production, etc. And countries will need to be able to address such linkages when implementing the SDGs. Because water does connect ecosystems from source to the sea, and it connects sectors. Flows of water, sediment, pollutants, biota, even materials connect land, forests, cities, and rivers to deltas, coasts, and oceans. And when we change these different flows through activities such as expanded irrigation networks, hydropower, etc., there can be impacts further down in the system that may in turn affect the return flows back up in the system, such as migrating fish or other ecosystem services. But how are global policy frameworks reflecting upon such linkages? The commitments made already 2-3 decades ago in Agenda 21, the CBD, the Climate Convention, and of course very relevant to source-to-sea linkages, the Global Program of Action for the Protection of the Marine Environment from Land-Based Activities, the GPA. All these commitments demonstrate political commitment towards applying integrated, coordinated ecosystem approaches that are able to manage linkages and trade-offs between different sectors and ecosystems. But translating such ambitions into frameworks that can be implemented and monitored in an equally integrated fashion is often easier said than done. Looking at how upstream, downstream, or source-to-sea linkages are captured by the Sustainable Development Goals provides an indication of some of the challenges. The strongest links provided between freshwater and marine targets and indicators are found in relation to water quality, IWRM, and ecosystems. This makes a lot of sense, of course. The connection between water quality and marine pollution, between river basin management and effects downstream, and the inclusion of deltas as a water-related ecosystem. But it's hard to make a framework even though it's as ambitious as the Sustainable Development Goals, all-encompassing. So there are, of course, also some gaps. There is little reference to sediment flows, links between hydropower, sediment depletion, etc. There is little reference to diffuse sources of pollution, for example. And going into how indicators are formulated, the indicators related to IWRM and transboundary water management, for example, they don't really consider the capacity to assess and address downstream priorities when measuring a country's ability to implement those management frameworks. And there are also very little links between process indicators, the how, development assistance, capacity targets related to development assistance, capacity building research and partnerships, etc. And that's also a sign of the fact that we're still talking about two silos between the freshwater and the coastal communities, so to say. And looking at the overall SDG agenda, the linkages between the source-to-sea linkages are all over. The importance of water as a resource, of water quality, of water-related ecosystems are explicitly referred to throughout the whole SDG agenda. You can see all the different targets that refer to that in these slides. There are a number of them. However, at the indicator level, the SDG indicators, those that concern sustainable production, like food, energy, industry, etc., those indicators don't really capture issues related to water use and water quality. Those issues are primarily dealt with in relation to goals and targets for freshwater and oceans, the SDG 6 and 14. Sustainable food production, for example, does not make any reference, the indicator there doesn't make any reference to agriculture as a source of water pollution, for example. And the indicator related to sustainable industries is focused on CO2 emissions and doesn't refer to water pollution very strongly. So if the different goals are divided between different institutions and sectors at national level with different mandates for their implementation, without investing in mechanisms that can track linkages between different goals and how they influence each other, it will be difficult to achieve both goals related to freshwater and oceans, as well as many other goals. So the SDGs, they provide a good framework, but there will be a lot of effort needed to ensure linkages are captured, and that need for investments to address links between agriculture, water quality, and marine pollution, for example, are not neglected. And such challenges are, of course, not new or unique to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the type of coordination and prioritization challenges that countries are dealing with constantly. And where source-to-sea linkages, the linkages between upstream development and downstream pressures, is a very challenging area, as can be noted by the current state of our deltas, coasts, and oceans. Hopefully, the Sustainable Development Goals can provide even more incentive to strengthen governance, collaboration, and monitoring in ways that can enable informed trade-offs between different sectors and between different stakeholders, upstream and downstream. Because the SDGs in themselves, they will not change the administrative institutional situation many countries are facing. Looking at the entire source-to-sea continuum, management frameworks are often weak or overlapping, consisting of a mishmash of IWRM, ICM plans, land use, urban, and marine spatial plans, borders between municipalities and river basins, for example. And even if there's been a lot of progress when it comes to integrated management over the past decades, it's challenging to consider how activities affect the flows that connect a larger system and to set objectives in one segment that are balanced against potential downstream impacts. There are plenty of examples of how such source-to-sea connections have been underestimated or neglected or not properly managed. The Baltic Sea is still one of the world's most eutrophied seas, despite half a decade of strong collaboration between the neighboring countries. There are also plenty of examples of negative impacts from water and sediment flows, alterations, and of rivers where water and sediment flows have almost been entirely eliminated, with shrinking deltas, salinization, coastal erosion, and drastic reductions in biodiversity as a result. Almost 13 million tons of plastic end up in our oceans every year. It's now being considered a major global environmental problem, and almost half of all marine mammals are affected by marine litter. And 10 years ago, there was very little information available on this issue. And meanwhile, the need for housing, industries, and recreation along rivers and coasts is growing steadily. Cheaper dredging technologies is making the creation of new land cheaper than buying expensive seafront land in some locations. And that is, of course, putting additional pressure on coastal and delta areas. In short, there are a lot of different priorities to balance in source-to-sea systems, and we need to invest more in understanding the drivers for change and impact in the source-to-sea system as a whole to better manage them. Because at the end of this century will be 2-3 billion people more, all craving for better life, demanding more water, more food, more energy, and most of these people living along the coast. Meanwhile, climate change is likely to increase pressures on practically all ecosystems from land to sea, and especially those in the middle, the deltas and the coasts. To achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and other development objectives, we need to capture the opportunities available to balance economic growth with sustainability and avoid risking the economic growth opportunities downstream in coastal marine areas by failure to manage our activities upstream and their impacts. Sorry.
Hello, Birgitta. I don't know if we just lost your microphone there, but if you could try and reconnect, that would be great.
Yeah. So this requires understanding the system that you are in, the drivers, the pressures, the state and vulnerabilities in the source-to-see system, and the impacts of development pressures. One of the key challenging areas affecting most of the source-to-see initiatives that we have reviewed involve engaging key stakeholders in upstream sectors, upstream municipalities, and gaining their commitment towards coastal and marine improvements or restoration. Once there's often a need for additional investment to increase their commitment in such activities. And once that is in place, a theory of change or joint objectives can be established to improve for a way forward. So taking these aspects into consideration, in 2014, a number of organizations that are committed to addressing these linkages and supporting innovative approaches to governance and management from source to sea and generate shared knowledge on effective approaches and valuable experiences to address these important interlinkages, joined together and established an action platform on source-to-sea management. For more information on this platform, please visit the website or contact me. And during the past few years, we have been working on, in addition to the logos listed here, we have also been collaborating a lot in the past few years with the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the GEF and the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. And it is in the collaboration with those agencies that many of the results that I presented here today have been harnessed. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks for that, Birgitta. I think you did a great job of giving us the big picture and covering quite a huge area in very limited time using human terms and language. And I know, just so the listeners are aware, I know you wanted more time to be able to go into more detail. So if people would like us to get Birgitta back for a later webinar, please let us know, and we'll look and try and see if we can make that happen. Before we move on to the next presentation with Dan, we've time for a quick question to Birgitta. And just to remind you, please make good use of the question box on the right-hand side. So far, we haven't received that many questions, but that's usually a sign of people listening very carefully and attentively. I know I was. A quick question for you, Birgitta, before we move on. Source to see or the source to see concept. For some people listening in here, they might say, well, this is old wine in new bottles, and this we've already had something called ridge to reef, or we already have something. Please, could you share with us what you see as the relationship with, for example, or between source to sea and ridge to reef?
Yes, thank you. No, I think, well, basically there's no competition. I think ridge to reef is many of the ridge to reef initiatives have provided very useful experiences on what I then call source-to-sea approaches. I see ridge-to-reef as being an example of a source-to-sea approach. However, the ridge-to-reef concept, there is no unified definition of what ridge-to-reef is, so it's hard to say what the difference is. I think we, in the work through the platform, we have worked hard to define sort of what is meant by source-to-sea, and we see it as a broader concept. The term ridge-to-reef also often leads the thoughts towards the tropics or small island developing states, but source-to-sea is a slightly broader concept, and I would say also now quite well defined through the work that we have been doing. But definitely the ridge-to-reef experiences provide very useful lessons.
Yeah, so just to summarize there, there's no conflict or competition, and I think we could probably say that source-to-sea is building or learning from other examples, but perhaps that one main difference is the amount of definition or effort that has been put into defining the source-to-sea concept and what it means, both in, perhaps one could say, more academic terms, but also in practical terms on the ground. So thank you very much for that, Birgitta. Maija, could I please ask you to pass the presentation over to Dan? Could I ask Birgitta to please mute her microphone if you haven't already done so, Birgitta, and Dan to unmute his microphone. And Dan, whenever you see that pop-up box, and press it. Yes. Now we can see your presentation, Dan. We just need to hear your voice and for you to switch your presentation to presentation mode. That's great.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Tarlock from Chicago, Illinois. My presentation, the theme I tried to capture in the title, water deltas, the stepchildren of water resources development. Before I start, I want to just pick up a couple of themes from the last presentation. So I'm going to talk about one source-to-sea problem, river deltas, and as the previous presentation indicated, there are a number of stresses, and I just want to divide them into three categories: physical, policy, and legal. The stresses include upstream dams, upstream diversions, often the cause of saltwater intrusion, the retardation of historic cycles, deposits of sand, excess nutrient deposit in deltas, and these are all exacerbated in many areas by global climate change. The second category of stress are the policies which have guided water resources development until relatively recently. And finally, their legal stresses. I'm a lawyer. In very brief, both international water law and the domestic water law of almost all countries encourages upstream intensive development and ignores the problems of deltas. So I'm going to focus on the policy and legal, and then at the end I'll come back and link this to SDGs. Specifically, I'll talk a little bit about goal 6.52. So from a policy perspective, if you look at the history of water resources development in the major countries that did it, the United States, the former Soviet Union, parts of Africa. The dominant river basin development paradigm was maximum development of the basin's water resources. And that had two very specific components. First of all, in the name of efficiency, water that flowed to the ocean was viewed as wasted water because it was not being used. Of course, it was being used for what we now call aquatic ecosystem conservation, the support of ecosystem services, but those concepts are late 20th century concepts. And what followed from that was a view among many engineers who really controlled water resources development that rivers were imperfect examples of nature and needed to be perfected, and of course perfected by dams and diversions. And so what that meant was that deltas were ignored. So here is in the United States just a map of the Colorado River system, which empties into the ocean in Mexico, in Baja California. And this map just shows the major dams on the river, but you can see it's a heavily dammed river, and there are major diversions in California, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. Now, one of the many challenges of protecting deltas is that in the United States, for example, we're not building very many dams now. But as you can see from the map, in Africa, Asia, South America, and Canada as well, we're in a major dam building era, similar to what happened in other countries in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So deltas continue to be stressed. So I'll just give 3 examples here, and there are many more. In the United States, the Colorado River Delta, which I showed earlier, was almost extinguished because the entire flow of the river was diverted before the river reached the sea. And there is an allocation regime on the Colorado River. There's an international treaty between Mexico and the United States. But for a long time, both countries said the treaty allowed them to use all the water to which they were entitled, and the delta was just an unfortunate consequence of that, but it had no legal status. Another delta in the United States, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, upstream from San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Area, has been battling saltwater intrusion for decades due to the increase in upstream and actually downstream diversions from the delta. Then in Asia, I'm sorry, said the wrong word there. The Mekong is also experiencing saltwater intrusion, both from dikes in the lower Mekong, dams in the upper Mekong basin, and these are being exacerbated by climate change. So you can see in places like Vietnam, There's been a lot of dike construction to increase rice production, and those impacts are felt downstream in the delta. I want to switch now a little bit to a positive mode and look at some of the pressures for delta conservation. We have a greater appreciation of the economic values of the delta for land uses that occur in the deltas. The recognition of the importance of biodiversity conservation, the concept of ecosystem services provide support for greater delta conservation. From a legal perspective, we have the Ramsar Wetland Convention. This goes back to 1971. It allows countries to designate the wetlands of special significance, then pledge to conserve them. The onus for protection basically falls on the countries themselves, and but if you look around the world, when a country has designated a Ramsar wetland, and it does engage in water resources development, this does put pressure on the governments to include protection of the Ramsar site in any river basin development plan. I've seen this in 2 countries, and I'm sure there are many other examples, Costa Rica and in Ghana. And finally, as the rights of indigenous populations grow, these populations can be found in deltas, and that's another pressure for protection. How do we go about protecting them? Well, most river systems, major river systems, are regulated. That is, they have upstream dams. We need to alter to some extent the operation of those dams to provide minimum flow releases for deltas. There's a voluntary program going on into the in the Mekong for this, and in other river basins. In some cases, it will actually be necessary to retire upstream water entitlements to increase delta flows. Two examples of this. In Australia, the major river system is the Murray-Darling, and it flows into the Pacific Ocean near Adelaide. For a long time, upstream diversions have increased the salinity downstream and at the mouth. The Australian government now has an ambitious Commonwealth state program to address the issue, and the government has actually begun to compensate entitlement holders if to retire the entitlements to put less pressure downstream. In the Colorado River in the United States, a long campaign of pressure by NGOs actually forced the 2 governments, Mexico and the United States, to amend the treaty between them to actually include provisions for protection of the delta, and NGOs developed a plan to actually purchase water rights in Mexico, and in 2014 you actually had a restoration flow into the delta, and previously water flowed into the delta only in extraordinarily wet years when water had to be released from reservoirs. But here's a plan to try to restore at least a remnant of the delta. So the last thing I want to say is that among the many linked SDGs, as indicated by the last presentation, 6.52 calls for the greater use of integrated water management planning, IWRM. IWRM is a construct that emerged in the last decades of the 20th century, and one of its primary purposes is to balance the historic preference for intensive water development with greater environmental protection. As indicated, the indicators are not quite reaching these problems such as source to sea, but nonetheless, I think it's an important starting point for what has to be done. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you to you as well, Dan. That was great to start with that historical perspective, and of course, good to know that remedial action is possible. Before we move on to the next presenter, a quick question for you. We went from the historical to the present day, but how do you see the future for deltas? Are things generally going to get better or worse as the world develops? Can you share your thoughts?
You know, it's really country and region specific, but this slide, which I put up, especially in South America and in parts of Asia, definitely suggests that it could get worse because you're going to get more dams, and we still don't have a good legal policy handle on planning dams that meet the Millennium Development Goals, that are really good examples of integrated water resources planning.
Right, right. Many thanks for that, Dan. Dan and Birgitta, please hang around. We'll be coming back to you for some final questions. Maija, please could I ask you to pass over to Jacob, and Jacob, if you can accept and unmute your microphone. Yes, we can see your presentation, we can hear you. Please feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Garrett. And I also want to thank the previous presenter. Birgitta did a good job, and Dan put things in perspective in terms of the effect of all of this on the Delta. My name is Jacob Opadeyi. I'm from the University of the West Indies, based in Trinidad. My presentation will focus mainly on the unique and interlinked source to sea of small island developing states, with special emphasis on the Caribbean. I will present the issues that we have in the small island states and end up with what are the opportunities to reverse this situation.
Jacob, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm a little bit aware of time, and unfortunately, you being the last presenter, if you could somehow speed things up a little bit, that would be great.
I will do that.
I'm sorry.
I will do that. This is the Caribbean, and you can see all the small islands scattered all over the ocean, mostly surrounded by the ocean, and just a little piece of the land to deal with. The small island is mostly mountainous, beautiful beaches, limited land space for development, and as a result of this, there's a lot of intensive coastal development along the coastline. Part of the problems in this island is high population densities, You can see with Cayman with 990 persons per square kilometer. What are some of the environmental and social factors that contributes to the small island developing state? We have high exposure to the incident of natural hazards. The physical geography and the geology limits extensive land use and also agriculture. We have problems of limited or absence of surface and groundwater that constrains water supply. And that's why you see most of the islands depends on desalination for water supply. The steep geography and the volcanic rocks accelerate the surface to sea issues. We have influence of inadequate land supply influences informal settlement, as I will show you in the pictures, and economic conditions prohibit the provision of social and economic infrastructures. What are the key water resources concerned for these seeds? Water shortages due to limited freshwater resources is exacerbated by limited rainfall and high incidence of drought. Now, for the last 3 months in the Caribbean, we've been faced with high level of dry season that diminishes the water supply. Water supply is also threatened by pollution from domestic, commercial, and industrial operations. High energy demands has led to deforestation, and this has increased soil erosion and sediment travels to the sea. Still very unregulated waste disposal and untreated water that flows straight into the sea. This is a picture of the hillside development on the mountains, on the hills. Most of them are informal, and you see high level of development along the coastline. These are coastline developments that are highly intensive. Some of these are in Grenada, Trinidad, and also in British Virgin Islands. What is the impact of all of this on the environment? The extensive housing and agricultural activities has led to increase in runoff and slope instability. Once there is increased runoff, it means our wet waste will run quickly into the sea, supported by the slope of the mountainous region. We've seen a large destruction of wildlife habitat, coastal erosion due to building on the slopes, and also saltwater intrusion, as pointed out by Dan shortly. This is affecting a lot of the limited water supplies that we have, groundwater pollution, and beach erosion. I will show you some of the pictures of this, the next slide. This is an example of how it falls from industrial, commercial, straight into the sea, and some straight into the rivers and dams. And we have where everything ends up. Domestic activities on the river, dumping our waste into the river and near seas, incident of oil pollution, and all of this domestic waste end up on the reefs. Coastal erosion is, as I said, whereas part of it may be environmentally, natural causes, but our unregulated building constructions on steep slope and also extensive use of the coastal resources exhibit all of this. These are examples of fish kills that has resulted from unregulated land use on the upper catchment. Pollution of the sea and pollution of the river and the coastal pollution as a result of unregulated waste disposal that needs urgent attention. What are the opportunities for improvement? The opportunities for improvement start with improving on or updating our current land use plan with special emphasis on the effect of our land use on marine resources. Upgrading of our legislation and regulations to protect coastal and marine resources, and this is where Goal 6 and Goal 11 meets. Incentive for the use of environmentally sensitive solid waste disposal system, and I use the word incentive because if you want people to change their habits, they must have some incentive to make them make the change. Upgrade and expansion of sewage treatment plants so that we can avoid direct outfall of our sewage into the sea, into the rivers and the sea. Active public awareness and, in fact, public education program, and I would say this from kindergarten all the way to the general public. And active monitoring of coastal and marine and ecosystem, marine and coastal ecosystem will help us to improve on all of this. Thank you.
And many thanks to you, Jacob, for that. That was great to get that perspective from the Caribbean. And I think before we go on to some questions also for you, Maija, if you could just pass the presentation over to me, and I will open up for those questions now. I'm pretty sure we still have all the presenters, but I'd like to start with a couple of questions for Jacob. Jacob, how typical are those experiences you have in the Caribbean for other small island developing states, and are there any that are particularly unique to the Caribbean, which you perhaps wouldn't find out elsewhere?
I think the problem is answered by the triangle presented by Birgitta, looking at the economic, environmental, and social development. When we put the pressure on economic development and social development, the environment suffers. And what we've seen is that the whole cost of providing support for to prevent environmental degradation is not highly been seen as something that the politicians can look at. So I would say in general, you have pockets of all of these incidents in most small island developing states.
Thank you. And next one also for you, Jacob. Dan and Birgitta, I'll be coming to you shortly. Do you see, from a country's perspective, the SDGs as a challenge, or are they an opportunity from the point of view of the Caribbean, or even Trinidad, if it makes it easier?
I see it as an opportunity to start with, because the SDG 6 and 14 is bringing issues that we normally don't look at, and so it's an opportunity to create the awareness. Once you get the awareness of the issues, then you create opportunity to seek investment to solve all of this problem. When we are able to look at the action and reaction of what we do, I think it will provide us opportunity to live in harmony with nature.
Thank you very much for that, Jacob. I would like to move over to Birgitta now. Birgitta, are you still with us? Can you unmute your microphone?
I'm here.
Hi. Question for you, please. Someone here is suggesting, I'm trying to condense the question a little bit, but they're asking why more consideration hasn't been taken of SDG 15, protect and restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. So someone is suggesting an approach whereby we triangulate SDG 6 with SDGs 14 and 15. So freshwater, marine, and terrestrial ecosystems. Do you have a view on that? Is it would that solve the problem, or what should we do?
I agree, actually, because, well, I think when we did, I was referring now to the outcomes of a study that was commissioned by the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management.
Yes.
And they specifically wanted to look at 6 and 14, but I think since then we have discussed more if maybe we need to expand this analysis to also include 15. I think that I fully agree with that analysis. So I think that would be an interesting follow-up.
Okay, excellent, because that leads on to the very next question for you, which is, what are the plans to further advance or develop or apply the source-to-sea concept? Could you share your thoughts with us on what could be done or what is being done?
I think, well, that is one aspect to, but that comes to the analysis and more understanding how the gaps and the strengths and the weaknesses that the SDG framework provides, and how we can help countries in addressing some of the gaps and building on some of the strengths. So I think there, to link more to SDG 15 and perhaps also the more how to work with the more production geared SDGs, food, energy, etc. That is one aspect. And then I think another key challenge that has been identified is the challenges to engage upstream actors. And I think more methodologies can be developed on ways to integrate coastal and marine priorities in upstream development processes, such as river basin management or hydropower development or similar.
Right, right. All good ideas. I'm sure you have more. Dan, could I please move over to you? Are you still with us?
Absolutely.
Right, a quick one for you here. How effective are Ramsar site designations? I will quote this literally. Are they sometimes simply an eyewash, or do they put actual pressure on?
Well, like all questions, it's a false dichotomy. There are a very large number of Ramsar sites. From a legal standpoint, there is no real enforcement mechanism in the convention. There is a conference of parties. There is a professional staff in Switzerland. They have some power to conduct investigations at the request of parties. And so, and there are a lot of threats to Ramsar sites, but as I say, I have both in the literature and from experience seen that if a country has a Ramsar site, it's usually a source of some pride to the country to have the site, and it puts some constraints on water resources planning. They've got to pay attention, I think, to the site and take some steps to try to mitigate any adverse impacts from development. It's obviously an uneven process, but for example, the Colorado Delta is a Ramsar site, and it played a part in the ultimate legal arrangement for a pilot program for restoration.
So we're better off with Ramsar sites. That's good to know. Just to wrap up, I would like to give the last word to Birgitta. Birgitta, I would like to hear if you have any final reflections on this group of presentations we've shared today, and also to pick up on a question that's come in. Asking for some idea of how to harmonize and make effective the impacts of the numerous projects we've heard about today from a source-to-sea perspective. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think on the presentations, I think it's been a very interesting set of the two presentations following mine on really taking up two examples of geographies, so to say, where the source to sea issue, all the source to sea issues basically converge. The deltas that are highly vulnerable in many places, and the SIDs where all upstream activities and downstream impacts happen in a very small geographical area often, and where you have the land management, the water resources management, and coastal management being sometimes coordinated and sometimes less coordinated perhaps, but in a very small geographic area. It's very interesting, I think. And then just a remark in relation to the first slide of Dan on water is wasted in the sea, presented as something that people said in the 90s. And I just got an email yesterday from a colleague who attended an agricultural conference in Africa where one of the ministers had referred to the ocean doesn't need more water in relation to the needs for irrigation expansion. So unfortunately, it's not the concept that belongs in the 90s, but it's very much alive in different parts of the world and in different sectors, I think. So we still have more work to do.
Many thanks for that, Birgitta. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in terms of questions and comments right now. For those of you that we didn't have time to get to, don't worry, we're planning to liaise with the presenters and share your questions with them in order to get you a response. There we go. As mentioned, this was the first webinar in the series. Right now we have the next one on water quality and marine pollution in relation to source to sea, of course, scheduled for March the 11th. So please mark your calendars all ready for that one. And we'll of course be sending out to the various mailing lists to advertise for that already. If you have any burning additional questions or issues, please send an email to Maija and she will either get back to you directly or get one of the presenters or myself to as a response. We're always looking to improve the quality of our work, so we'd be very grateful if you could use a couple of minutes to just quickly respond to the feedback survey form that will pop up when you shut down the webinar. The webinar recording from all the series as well as the slides we're going to be making available on YouTube and also via our website, at least for the video links as well as the slides from our website. So please expect to see them there by, I think, mid next week. Finally, please allow me to conclude today's session by thanking the presenters for taking the time to share their knowledge with us, and for Maija for her backroom support, always very much appreciated and not to be underestimated. I would also like to thank you, the participants, for taking the time to join us today, and hope you'll find the time to join us again on May the 11th for that next one. Please allow me to wish you all a very good morning, a good afternoon and good evening wherever you are.